Every group has a structure. It could be family dinner. Thinking of my family dinner, we'd get the 5-minute warning, which meant we had to go wash our hands in the garage very thoroughly. This is a rule of my father's, who had lost a brother in the orphanage from what he thought was germs and infection. So that was one of the norms or rules of family dinner. And then we were expected to talk about the children, to talk about our day in some way. And then we'd usually talk about whatever family carny business we had going on. And then often kids would eat and run and then come back and do the dishes. But that's just one example of my family group. I'm guessing your family group had different norms. But I'm talking every group has norms and has some kind of structure. Family hangouts. There's rules when you go play pickup basketball, when you go to an art class, a political rally, or maybe dog park etiquette. So whenever there's a variety of people together, whether these are talked about and explicit or not talked about and passed along through observation and modeling, and these are more implicit, groups have norms. When trouble begins is often when people have different ideas of what the norms or structure of a group is. Then it may need to get talked about. But in terms of being a group leader, as I continue in my career, I think this is maybe the most important spot to start in training new group leaders. So groups can have a variety of structures. I can think when I was leading a variety of mindfulness-based cognitive behavioral groups through community mental health organizations, it was a very, very rigid structure where there'd be 20 minutes of checking in, there'd be 30 minutes of homework review of the assignment and what we had learned didactically from the previous week. We'd spend 30 minutes learning new didactic material, and then there would be kind of 10 minutes kind of reviewing what was learned and going over the homework for the upcoming week. Now, this isn't an ideal structure. This seemed like a very good structure right out of the research and the manual for these types of groups. But other groups I've led or been a part of could be much more laissez-faire. I remember when I did my first Tavistock conference, and we all came into the room, and the leader looked at their watch and they said, "The task of this group is to explore its unfolding process." And that's basically all the leader said. So there was a structure and there was a task, but how we went about that task was really, really left up to the group. And there wasn't that we would spend the first half an hour creating group norms. It was just totally open in some way. I can think of other group trainings I've done where the leader has sat down and basically said, "Okay, let's begin." And then would be quiet for an extended period. So it makes me think of the first group that I ever did. I was a volunteer my first year of my master's program, working at an agency that was taking people who had been diagnosed with severe and persistent mental illness and getting them out of the state hospital and moving them into kind of a collaborative residency. And I was assigned the task of doing the kind of house community meeting. So there was the basic structure, which was there would be check-ins, and during these check-ins, some of the tasks of the leader was trying to monitor people's mental status in some way to see how they were doing, also to try to have them have an opportunity to put their experiences into words, into language, to get engaged with the world, to get out of maybe their internal processes in their head in some way. And then after the check-ins, we would basically ask everyone how things are going around the house. And then that was the basic structure. And then we might make a to-do list or things that need to get addressed, and we would come back to that the following week. So while this was the structure and this was the outcome that was wished for, is that these people continued to recover and find their way in the world outside of a state hospital. There was many, many subtle kind of processes going on within that group structure. So over time, some of the norms of that group was when someone experienced something similar to what someone else was saying, they would let them know. We kind of promoted also kind of celebrating small successes that people felt that they had in some way. We would kind of build cohesion around the similarities, around challenges in some way without reducing everyone's own personal journey and challenges into some universal model that would fit everyone. So this was in a Buddhist-inspired residential treatment center. So it was really, really focused on bringing the people in the group and in the residency to touch in with the environment, with their sense perceptions, with reality, to kind of notice their thoughts come back into the environment in some way. So this is the opposite of, say, my initial training in psychoanalytic school, where really the goal of the group leader was to really kind of foster regression and transference, as that was the path to healing in some way. So group norms and structures really depends upon your theoretical belief and also where you're working in some way. So I'm talking about working within agencies where oftentimes there would be a model of group or model of treatment that would influence what I would promote as the norms in the structure of the group, from very, very structured to maybe more just support-oriented groups. Say it was a group for relapse prevention, really steering the conversation back to the topics of substance use when the group felt like it was maybe not being productive or going too far away from that topic, but and there was still more tolerance within that group to do more work and exploration and maybe learn more skills and celebrate successes. So depending on your model, I think of some of the models I have been trained in, say modern analytic style. We put our thoughts and feelings in the words towards one another. We share the talking time and help others to do the same. That would be some of the basic norms of that group. Or I'm thinking of leading groups that were kind of focused on dreams at a academic programs retreat that we'd have in the morning, and the structure was someone would share a dream and the rest of the people would talk about how, if they had dreamt that, how they would, what it may mean for them in some way. And then in any of these groups, there's inevitable task drift or structure drift or norm drift. And I think it's the leader's task to kind of notice this or to try to help the other members notice this and to kind of bring it back to what you're trying to accomplish within that group and the processes that may help you move towards those outcomes in some way. Lou Ormont used to say the group leader needs to know they have a hammer. They don't have to use it, but they may need to show it sometimes. While this is kind of violent symbolism for this, I think the idea, and we can do this more gently, is to say in the dream group, if someone's complaining about a professor, saying, I'm hearing you don't like this professor, validate, but what we're doing now is we're working with this dream, and let's work with this dream now, and if you'd like, as a professor, you could come talk to me and we can talk about this in a different setting as opposed to what this task of this group is in some way. So when choosing kind of norms and choosing a structure, often you will get it assigned to you through a manualized treatment or from an agency that you're working in. Sometimes you'll have to follow, if you're part of a research study, the manual very, very closely. Other times you'll have more flexibility. And then sometimes in organizations or in private practice or in academic settings, you may have a lot more freedom to kind of organize the structure and the norms of the group in some way. So there's a lot of considerations. I think it's easiest just to have something assigned to you, but that may not be the most effective. So I think when some considerations you could have in thinking about how you want to structure a group would be what theoretical models, what processes do you believe will create change in the people of the group? Is that empathy? Is that feedback? Is that an interpretation? Is that learning new skills? So this would become part of what you would try to establish as the norms of the group. Now, norms can be living creatures within a group, and as a group develops and changes over time, you may want to shift the norms of the group. A classic example in the theory would be early on, a group leader is much more active in setting the norms, getting people involved, building cohesion. But as time goes on, they may take a step back, and with the idea that the group will be kind of self sustaining with the norms that may be most helpful in some way. So you're also thinking about who's in the group, what are their challenges, what are their identities, what are their hopes, what have been their previous treatment experiences, what have been helpful for them, what hasn't been helpful for them, and that to the best of your critical thinking ability, you're kind of considering this in what you want to set up as the norms of the group. A typical norm in many groups would be to make I statements. There's a funny joke that uh, we talk about, we make I statements in group, and I'm sure this happened to almost every group leader. One group member says to another group member, "You're a jerk." And we say, "Oh, that's not an I statement. It sounds like this person is impacting you for some way, impacting you in some way. Can you make that into an I statement?" They go, "Yeah, I'm sure you're a jerk." So with that story, the idea is that the leader is really the person most in charge of bringing the group back, reinforcing the norms, reinforcing the structure. And without this, there'll be slow drift into more and more kind of something that's not the original intention of the group and potentially not what might be most helpful for the group in some way. A topic that has been coming up a tremendous amount in my groups is I run several consultation groups with therapists, and given the state of the world, given their spot in their lives, they have really, really wanted much more of group process support, ability to share their experience, even some feedback around how to deal with complex situations in their relationships. And in that group, we talked about it. Should we do this? What would be positive? What would be negative about this? And we decided to include more of that within that group. And there may come a time where the group will have to renegotiate, making sure we don't completely lose the consultation part of that group. But oftentimes, so many of our clinical dilemmas do somehow relate back to our own lives or our own current life situations in some way. So let me stop there. So I think when you're thinking about group, having an idea of what structure would be most helpful, having critical thought around it, why you believe this would be most helpful, ideally having some negotiation, getting some buy-in from the members around this, and then with the idea that if there is flexibility, potentially you could have some flexibility around what the initial norms were and what might best fit the current challenges in the group members' lives or the current stages of group development. Okay, hope you found this helpful. Take care. Bye bye.